World War II Veterans Committee is pleased to present a special interview with Admiral Thomas Moore. The host of the program is Stephen Halper. The interview was taped on March 25, 1996 at the studios of Radio America, and we begin with Admiral Moore recalling an event 4 years before the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Before we went on this shakedown cruise, we had carrier qualifications off the what's called the the Chesapeake Bay there, and we were flying, and all of a sudden the word came in that the Japanese had attacked Panay. Now that was almost exactly to the day, 4 years before Pearl Harbor. Right. And that was a gunboat that was in the China Station. And all of us, we were so convinced that we were never going into port. We were going right to Japan right then and there, and just all we had was a toothbrush and a hairbrush or something, but we thought we're not going to put up with this nonsense.
So there was a lot of kind of anti-Japanese feeling and a lot of political talk about reining the Japanese in at that point.
Well, I don't like to characterize it as anti-Japanese, but I mean, after all, they sunk our ship. I mean, I didn't think we're going to let anybody sink our ship. Of course, that's an open season now. We got the Koreans grab the Pueblo, and people do anything they like to Americans, and we don't do anything about it.
Yeah, but
including the ambassadors, huh?
In those days, it was very different.
In those days, we didn't tolerate that as much as we do now, by any means.
Uh-huh. So you got past the scare about going out to the Pacific with only a toothbrush.
I wasn't scared. Hell, I thought I was disappointed it didn't go. I mean, I thought that's what we were for, But then along comes a war in Europe, and the clouds get thicker and thicker, and it was thought for one time that the Germans were going to capture England.
Yeah,
they had full
they were close.
intention.
Operation Sea Lion.
There's a story that Hitler said that the British are the only race that's worth saving, and we're not going to invade. I don't know whether that's true or not, but they came right up to the coastline ready to do it, and so...
And they took the Channel Islands?
Yeah.
I remember my tutor at Oxford told me that the British were facing them off with telephone poles made to look like cannons, so that when the bombers flying over the top took photographs, they'd think that the British were very well defended. They also had tanks and other vehicles painted on tarmacs to make it appear as if they had many more vehicles than in fact they had.
Well, and so in the United States, we were very isolationist. And Mr. Roosevelt made a statement that I will not send one American to fight in the European war, or words to that effect. And but at the same time, he was doing a little undercover work. We were covering the British ships against German submarines. We had the Lend-Lease law, which was illegal, I think. And Mr. Churchill and Roosevelt were meeting, and they made the agreement that the United States would move all our ships to the Pacific, and the British would take care of the Atlantic. And that the British Navy, if England was captured, would move to the United States coast. In fact, we built a tremendous dry dock at a place called Roosevelt Roads, which is just to the east of Puerto Rico. And to this day, no naval officer, I asked them about it, but that dry dock was actually built in case the British Navy had to abandon their own bases in England.
Is that right?
And so the Enterprise and the Yorktown and so on, all the carriers went through the canal and went over to the Pacific and were ordered to Hawaii as what was called a Hawaiian detachment. Really, it was the whole damn fleet.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the way that the ships started operating out of Pearl Harbor. And so when the Enterprise arrived in Pearl Harbor, then I got transferred to this patrol squadron.
My guest today is Admiral Thomas Moore, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And we're talking about the beginning of the World War II in the Pacific, the movement of the American fleet out to Hawaii, and Admiral Moore's service in Pearl Harbor. Admiral?
There were no airfields in the Pacific in those days in the islands. The only means of flying to the Orient was with the Boeing Clipper, which was a big seaplane.
Landed in the water.
And we were flying big planes. They had a crew of 8. And so in connection with getting back to the discussions of agreements between Roosevelt and Churchill, Churchill agreed to put 2 ships in Singapore, capital ships, which were the Repulse and the Prince of Wales. Mm-hmm. And the United States agreed to put several B-17s into Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. Mm-hmm. But MacArthur managed to let them get caught on the ground later, but that's another story. And I got in the act again as a lieutenant. The B-17s for the first time used 100-octane fuel. Mm-hmm. And so there was a rarity. And the only 100-octane fuel in the southeast where the B-17s had to go down through Australia and up to the Philippines. And because I said, there are no airfields in Wake and no airfields in Midway and so on. And in order to get that 100-octane fuel, it took quite a negotiating. And so 2 colonels were going to go down to Australia to contract for the fuel, but they didn't know how to get there. So we took them down there, 2 Air Force colonels. And we went into Rabaul and went into Port Moresby and Darwin and so on, and came back, and my squadron immediately got ordered to Midway. Mm-hmm. Now, this is in the end of October. Mm-hmm. We stayed in October, and things kept heating up until the Friday before the war started, and we were ordered back to Hawaii.
Mm-hmm. So you just got in that weekend?
Yeah, got in that weekend, late Friday night, and the war started Sunday morning.
Why were you ordered back?
I don't know, other than there were so many messages going back and forth, but not the right one, unfortunately, mm-hmm. Between Washington and Hawaii. But I never did know why they called it back. As a matter of fact, I still have a copy of the message they sent us, which I think is really a eye-buster. It said, be prepared to take 6 or 12 planes east or west.
What?
So we didn't know whether we're going to Wake or Guam, or coming back with 6 planes and stay with 6, or take 6 to Hawaii, or what? But that's what the message said. Well, we prepared all right, but they say 12 planes east. We went back to Hawaii.
Now, on that Sunday morning, when the attack began, were you able to get any of your planes up?
No.
Just impossible.
Yes, they strafed the planes, and when you our squadron was posted on, operated on the western tip of Fort Island. There's an island right in the middle of Port Pearl. Uh-huh. And all the planes were strafed. That was the first step that the Japanese took, was to strafe all the planes, including the fighters. Fortunately, though, the Enterprise, all our aircraft carriers were out. Mm-hmm. And that was...
that is very fortunate.
Very fortunate. And... But
But they didn't launch, did they? They were not in the operational...
They weren't close enough to launch. Yeah. They were escorting the Marine fighters to Wake.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, the day before I left Midway, I escorted those fighters myself from the carrier to the island, because the fighters had no navigation equipment to speak of, and the Wake Island is... about as high as this table above sea level. And unless you get right on top of it, you can't see it. It's not like a mountain, you know, you can see 30 miles away or something like that. And so I was an expert then at sun sights with Octa. That's the way we navigated all through the Pacific, because we were we really didn't have the newer things. People overlooked the fact we didn't have radar, and the only way you could find a ship was to see it.
That's right.
Only way you could find a ship. But anyway, I was getting ready to go to work and was looked up. I was living right outside the base, and I saw these Japanese planes in the distance. And they came three ways. They came around the east side, they came around the west side, and they came right through what we call a saddle, which is where the island of Oahu dips like that. And that's the Schofield Barracks were up in that area. But anyway, I grabbed my co-pilot, who was right around the corner, and we raced out there. And I got there just after the part of the first strike began, which, as I said, was strafing the aircraft. And we had these aircraft had air-cooled guns, and we had chiefs, petty officers, that took the guns out of the plane, and they were holding up like they're shooting, and burning all the flesh off their hands, and they'd still kept right on shooting. And so we only lost one man, and strange enough, he had to watch the evening before, and he was only hit by one bullet. He was asleep when he got killed, so he never knew there was a war. But then we had to go through all the aircraft, because in an airplane you can't take a chance. You got to check the hydraulic lines, the fuel lines, the electric lines. But you have to get up in the air, and the thing vibrate a little bit, and the gasoline spray all over the place.
Sure.
So not until that night did we get two planes ready, and I took off in one of them.
So you were one of the first planes out of there.
Yeah.
One of the first two planes.
Yeah.
Where did you go?
Well,
did you go out to...
The staff, Kimmel's staff, thought that the Japanese would beat it back to Kwajalein, which was southwest. So they decided if I flew towards Kwajalein all night long, I could go out to a distance further than the aircraft, the Japanese could reach. Then at daylight, I'd turn around and I'm bound to pass over them. Well, again, no radar. You see, you wouldn't even have to worry about whether you could see them or not, and if you had radar. So. And people write books about Pearl Harbor and so on. And anything else, they overlook the fact that the technology existing at the time is not what we have today. But they can't get away from the fact that they think everybody lives in a static world.
Yeah.
But the world is changing like hell all the time.
Yeah. So So then you went out, and did you come back? Did you actually see the Japanese fleet?
No, they went north.
They went north. Okay.
And they came in from the north. They never were down there. Right. But they were just trying to estimate since we only had two planes.
Let me take you to 2.5 months later. You were flying a mission in the Dutch East Indies, and you were shot down, rescued, and the ship that rescued you was itself sunk that same day. Quite a day. What happened?
Well, in the first place, what was I doing down there? Mr. Roosevelt was a big fanfare in Washington. They announced that they were sending reinforcements to the Philippines. Well, of course, the Japs had already captured Wake, and the only way you could get to the Philippines was to go down through the Fiji Islands to Noumea, to Townsville, to on over to Java, and join the remnants of the squadron that had come down from the Philippines. See, there were two PBY squadrons in the Philippines, and we joined them, and we more or less operated as a unit. And we were operating from tenders. That is, we had ships converted World War I destroyers that had fuel aboard. They took two boilers out and made bunks for the pilots and so on. And so we were spread all over the place, all of the Celebes Islands, Borneo, Java, Sumatra, on down to Darwin, because the Dutch East Indies are very, very hundreds of islands that extend all the way from Singapore, that is Sumatra, to Timor.
Right.
And this time we began to get information that the Japanese that were at Pearl Harbor had detailed 2 carriers to go to Wake, and the other 4 to come down and attack Darwin. So my mission was to find those carriers, which I did. I ran right into a big flight of planes, a couple of hundred.
Couple of hundred of Japanese planes.
Japanese, from the same carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor.
Uh-huh.
On their way to Darwin.
Uh-huh.
And so...
Were you with a flight of American aircraft? Or?
No, by myself.
You by yourself?
With the PBY, see. And they 9 Zero fighters came down and set my plane afire. They were firing incendiary bullets.
Uh-huh.
And they were splashing all over the place. In fact, they had a very low muzzle velocity. I could actually see the bullets.
Could you really?
Yeah. And
the 9 of them chased you down.
Well, what they did was set me afire. We had no leak-proof tanks, and the airplane had fabric, ailerons, and tail, and that immediately caught fire. And fortunately for me, the fighter people realized that they better get back with the bombers, because the bombers are going to get the Darwin by themselves if they didn't rejoin. So they didn't stick around or try to strafe us on the water or whatever. They pulled off, and when they saw we were down, crashed, and on fire, they rejoined there. And last I saw them, they were still going towards Darwin. Well, the United States had chartered 6 merchant ships to take ammunition to Corregidor, different routes, hoping that one of them would, at least one would
get there.
Get there. And one of these ships, which was a Philippine ship, saw this. Me hit the water. And so, following the dictates of etiquette at sea, he came over and picked me up. And we had trouble getting to the boat because to the ship, because the rubber boats we had were all full of holes. And
were you injured in this? Were you hurt?
Yeah. It wasn't as serious as on the leg, left hand, right here on this side.
Mm-hmm.
But I could walk, and we only had the radioman had a broken ankle,
uh-huh.
and he was the only one that was really hurt.
Uh-huh. How many crew did you have?
8.
8 of you. Mm-hmm.
And so we went aboard ship, and I went up to talk to the captain. And as soon as I found out that he was loaded from stem to stern with ammo, I told my crew, I want you to get back on the stern, and we're going to get attacked again. And you watch me, and the minute I see a dive bomber coming down, I want every one of you to jump over the side. Well, about 2:30 that afternoon, I saw this stream of dive bombers coming down, and I said, jump. So we all jumped over the side, except one man. He had gotten bored and gone up to talk to something, but we never saw him again. He was killed. And the ship, of course, kept moving. So we were far enough away from the bombs that were exploding all around the ship that although it was very painful, it wasn't fatal. And so the ship went down bow first. The first bomb blew the bow completely off. It was a big ship, 600 feet long or so, I think. And so the stern was left out above water. And so a couple of us climbed back up and cut the lifeboats back down, loose. And I put my they splashed into the water. And I put my co-pilot in one, and I got in the other, and we went around trying to pick up the remnants of the ship crew. And we did. We got about 40 of them. I think it was must have had a crew of about 80. And some of them were terribly burned and died very quickly. But anyway, we picked them up. As soon as we got them up, we got strafed now this time, and everybody jumped over the boat, out of the boat again, and we had to pick them up a second time.
Second time.
And I examined the boat, and they had no water and no compass, but they had a case of milk, and they had sails. And I knew how to sail. So we set up the sails, and they had fortunately had a case of condensed milk. I'm sure it was water buffalo, but anyway, it was better than nothing. And they had also I had the Southern Cross, which was sitting up as like the North Star, just as pretty as you please.
Right.
So I made a estimate and tried to. I thought I was sailing to Darwin, but I got drifted north. And a few nights later, I heard the surf about midnight, and we beached the boats.
And what was the island?
It was Bathurst Island. And as soon as we beached the boats, those Filipino kids, all about 22, 20, 19 years old, they leaped out and went in the jungle just as hard as they could go. You know, they'd had enough of this war. And I often thought that if I ever have time, I'm going down there and tell them the war's over, because I think they're still in that jungle.
Okay. My guest is Admiral Thomas Moore, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We're talking about World War II and his very dramatic experience in the Dutch East Indies, having been shot down, rescued, and having the rescue ship itself blow up. Admiral, that was a defining experience in many respects. You managed to save yourself and a considerable number of other people. What happened next?
Well, let me tell you how I saved myself. I mean, I think I'm telling half a story and then starting another. And this
Please.
would flow, you know,
Okay.
one thing to another. When we got ashore, it was on a gorgeous beach, sand beach, and just like sugar, you know. No cigarette butts, no Coca-Cola bottles, or nothing. Just beautiful. And I got the idea of building letters in sand. Letters about 4 feet wide and 3 feet high, about like this table, that said water medicine. And fortunately, 4 days later, I think, a reconnaissance plane from Darwin, an Australian reconnaissance plane, came over and he saw this. So he dipped his wings and dropped a note, said, "I'll be back." He came back and dropped a note, said, "We'll pick you up at daylight." So at daylight, I looked out there, and sure enough, there was an Australian destroyer and sent in a boat and picked us up back to the ship and headed for Darwin. Well, as soon as we got headed for Darwin, a Japanese seaplane came over and started dropping bombs on us. The captain of this ship had just come from Crete in the Mediterranean. The Crete was the first objective that was ever captured solely with paratroopers. And that was when Mountbatten's destroyer got sunk, and the British lost quite a few ships. It was a hell of a battle there. And this captain was there, and so he thought that compared to the Germans, the Japs were nothing. And so he was an old-timer. The poor old guy is still alive, but he's blind and deaf. But anyway, he had every time they would start the horizontal bombing, you got to have a steady course during the final part of the bombing. And he had a tar barrel on the stern of that destroyer, and he'd light off that tar barrel, and all this black smoke would come in. He'd back down in the smoke, you know, and they never touched us. And so finally we got to Darwin, and he said, "I'm sorry, I got another mission. I'll have to put you off." So put us off, and I had been to Darwin when I took those two colonels down to make a contract for 100-octane gas. I knew where the hotel was. We got to the hotel. There wasn't a man, woman, or child in town. Nobody. They're so sure that the Japanese were going to invade that they'd put what they call the bush. But fortunately, they left steaks in the icebox and whiskey on the bar, so we just signed up in the register for a week or so in this hotel. Well,
sounds like you pulled some hard duty.
We were barefooted and in shorts and looked like hell, you know, and no razor. But anyway, the MPs finally came by, and we got word to our squadron, who by that time had retreated all the way to Perth, Australia, which is like San Diego is the United States, and sent word and they came and picked us up. About that time, we began to intercept the Japanese
radio traffic
on the Battle of Midway. And so they got orders, and I told you that we shifted from one type of plane to another. So they took all the fighter pilots that, thinking there were going to be great losses at Midway, or could be, and ordered us back to the United States. So that's the way I got back to the United States.
Right. What did you come back to do?
Well, actually, we came back from the leftovers from the battle in Southeast Asia, around Indonesia and Australia, of the remnants of the so-called Asiatic fleet, which had retreated south from the Philippines, and my squadron was ordered out to the Philippines, and after we had lost all our planes at Pearl Harbor. And it was during patrol from Darwin, Australia, that I ran pell-mell into the task force that had been at Pearl Harbor, and got shot down. I was rescued by a Philippine ship, and that is a merchant ship that was taking ammunition to MacArthur and Corregidor. And I recognized right away that we were going to be attacked. And I ordered my crew to go back to the stern of the ship and be prepared to jump over the side when I saw the dive bombers coming. And that's exactly what happened. I had a crew of 8. One boy got bored because it was so hot. It was right on the equator. And went forward. We never saw him again. Mm-hmm. The 7 of us jumped over the side. And the ship, of course, got hit shortly thereafter. It had gone about 3 ship lengths, I guess, or 2 ship lengths, and blew up the bow, and the ship went down in about a 45-degree angle. When the Japanese left, the stern was still afloat, and we climbed back up on the ship and released the lifeboats, and then...
How did you climb up the stern of the ship? Did you sort of climb onto the rudder and the...
We swam over where the ship was at the waterline, and then walked back up the ship.
Oh, I see. The 45-degree angle, you were able to kind of
we were pulling along, things to grab a hold of, you know. And I put my co-pilot in one ship, and we rescued all the survivors of the Philippine ship, which were about 40, as I recall. I think they had a crew of about 80, and half of them were lost. Put 20 of them in one boat and 20 in the other boat, and they had no compass and no water, and so, but they had sails, and I knew how to sail, so we set sail for what I thought was Australia, using the Southern Cross as a compass, which is a very good one. Actually, after a couple of nights of that, about midnight I heard the surf, and we beached the boats. And it turned out not to be Australia, but a little island called Bathurst Island just north of Australia. We had drifted to the north. And as soon as we hit the water, the Filipinos, those that were still alive, jumped out of the boat and dashed into the jungle. They were young boys, about 20, and they'd had enough of this war. And I have always thought if I had enough money to, to get back down there again, I'd go tell them the war is over.
You think they're still up there in the jungle?
But anyway, we got picked up later by the Australians, taken to Darwin. Went into Darwin. There wasn't a man, woman, or child in the city. We went in the hotel. There was whiskey on the bar and steaks in the icebox. They'd left so fast they'd locked nothing. Boom. So we stayed there until finally my squadron came up and picked me up.
You were returning to the United States just after this dramatic event in Australia. What were you going to be doing back in Washington?
Well, at that time, the Battle of Midway was developing, and for fear that we'd have many pilot casualties, all fighter pilots, ex-fighter pilots that survived the battle with the Asiatic fleet were
ordered back to Washington as replacements for the possible losses. And in those days, the Navy required a pilot to fly every kind of airplane we had, and I'd already spent 3 years on the aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise, as had many of our fellow pilots with the patrol planes, and so they were all well qualified with carriers. So they took all of them and ordered them back to the States to be used as replacements. As it turned out, of course, knowing the history of the Battle of Midway, it didn't turn out that way. We didn't have losses to that degree, although we had heavy losses. And so I had settled down. They were going to give me a rest. I went to Banana River, where we had a big seaplane base, to act a little while as an instructor. And
where was Banana River?
It's in Florida.
In Florida.
And as a matter of fact, one of our students was Kennedy.
Is that John Kennedy?
Who was later lost, you know. But I had
his brother, his older brother, lost in France.
And no sooner had we gotten down there, I picked up my wife and baby I hadn't seen in nearly a year. Went down there, and I got ordered back to Washington, and they told me that Admiral King wanted to see me.
Well, just before you get to that, tell me about your wife and baby. How old was your child at that time?
Well, he was born in about the time 1 year. He was 1 year old when the war started, so he was born in 1940. So at that time, as he was 1.5, I guess, something like that.
And I'll bet your wife was very happy to see you at that point, after all that you'd been through.
She certainly was. That was a wonderful thing to get back. She had gone home. We're from Alabama, and she'd gone home to stay with her family.
She'd been with her family all this time?
All this time, and of course, during those days, there were no airplanes. So she had to ride a ship from Hawaii to San Francisco, and then the train from San Francisco to Montgomery, Alabama, with that baby.
Long trip.
Wives never get enough medals, in my view.
And did she sort of follow the war from Alabama? Was she able to sort of keep up with where you were and what you were doing?
Later I was ordered into Norfolk, and she came up there for a while, and subsequently I took command of a squadron, and there was training in Florida. She came down there, so it was an off and on situation. But anytime we had a chance, she came up. For instance, when I was called up right away after I got down to Banana River, I went in to see Admiral King. I didn't have any idea what this was all about. And what it was all about was...
You couldn't imagine they were just wanting to give you a rest, could you?
No. They wanted me to go to England. And the British had developed, and the Germans first, a ground mine. That is not a conventional type of mine you see in all the pictures, but a mine that lay on the ground, on the bottom. And it was laid by...
On the bottom of the sea.
Yeah. And it was effective up to about 120 feet depth of the water. And initially the British thought it was sabotage, and that they were putting charge in the ships that went into London. But they finally found out what it was, because the ships leaving London would blow up. And they would finally got one of the mines that found one on the ground that didn't get in the water. The Germans had dropped it, and it was interesting what they did. They took the mine out in a big field, and they put numbers on all the parts, and gave a guy a field telephone, and he would announce, "I'm now moving screw number 5." And if the thing didn't blow up, he'd remove screw number 6. The problem was that the Germans had put a photoelectric cell inside, and the minute you broke the mine open and let the light hit the thing, it went up. So they had to take it apart in the dark till they found out exactly how it worked and how to defeat it. You know.
I don't want to get too technical, but how did they know there was a photoelectric cell?
They didn't.
They didn't
until it blew up. And then they realized what was happening. And then they had to go and try it in the dark.
Let me ask you another question. How do you get a volunteer to simply take screw 4, 5, 6 until he literally blows up and gets killed? I mean, were there people who volunteered to do this?
Oh, plenty of them. I mean, are they doing that over in Boston? These boys that volunteered to dig up these mines.
But this sounds like a kind of a blind process.
It was. It was something new, but World War II was going on then, and you don't realize, I think, what the people were really like in that war. Mm-hmm. At Pearl Harbor, one of the most vivid memories I have is the total change of attitude of the public. You know, Roosevelt had said, we will not send the boys to Europe and so on, although he had intention to do that, I'm sure, eventually, or he risked having to take them there. But the minute the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the entire public just absolutely, were totally dedicated to defeating the Japanese and defeating the Germans. And so you didn't have any trouble finding people to do that. Mm-hmm. People do all kinds of things, like the British, climbing the cliffs of Dover. Yeah. Things like that. And even many of the operations in the cross-channel operation were suicidal. People that do that.
Yeah. It really is a kind of a mindset. It's something that's a little, it's unusual in today's context.
Well, how about these fighter pilots out there on those 2 aircraft carriers flying at night? They, as I say many times, there's no draft dodgers in the cockpit.
Good point. Okay, well, so they were going to send you to England, and that's the reason they brought you back.
Yeah, I stayed over there about 6 weeks with the 5th Bomber Command, and I learned how these mines worked and how you laid them, mm-hmm. and came back and wrote a little instruction book on how to do it. Mm-hmm. Then I was interested in the submarine war, because at that point we were really losing the war, mm-hmm. in the Atlantic now. Mm-hmm. So I requested command of a anti-submarine squadron.
Mm-hmm. Say a few words as you go along about the German U-boat service.
Well, the German, with very few submarines, were about to put us out of business. I mean, you go up and down the East Coast, and none of the beaches were usable because the oil was 3 or 4 inches thick from merchant ships that were sunk. Initially, the masters of the merchant ships wouldn't pay any attention to instructions, and because they had to be at New York by 2 p.m. on such and such, by God, they were going to get there, and bang, they would be picked off. So it was a very serious thing, and so it took us a long time to develop the force.
How did the German submarines manage to stay on station for so long, and why were they so terribly accurate?
Well, because they had little or no opposition at the outset. And so we had to develop the detection devices, the sonar buoys, homing torpedoes. All of those things came about after the war started. And you got to recognize what the great difference between a submarine war and combat in the Pacific. In a submarine war, you win the war when you are building ships faster than the other side can sink them, and sinking submarines faster than they can build them. When those two things take place, you won it. And that happened in September 1943.
My guest today is Admiral Thomas Moore, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Admiral, we're talking about the German submarine service and the very serious circumstances on the east coast of the United States when we were actually beginning to lose the war in the Atlantic. How did we eventually turn the corner on this? How long did it take us? And given the huge losses in the German service, how did they manage to keep going?
Well, the United States is a technical country, and so it just took a little time for us to develop the necessary weapons. In the first place, you have to detect a submarine, locate it. And in the second place, you have to have a means of killing it. And you're dealing with matters under the water. And under the water is far more uncertain and complicated than in the air. In other words, what I'm saying, a radar is one thing, but a SODAR is a victim of temperature change and layers of hot and cold water and all kinds of things. And we had to develop all the detection devices to detect, to find the submarine and then means to kill it. Also, we established bases And, Mr. Roosevelt acquired the bases from the British. And so we had to establish the aircraft squadrons there and train the people and so on. And all the way over to the coast of Africa.
Right. And the Germans, very dedicated, they were prepared to lose huge numbers of men just to close down our shipping, weren't they?
Sure, because, for instance, there was a hell of a battle up on the North Cape of Norway when we were sending supplies into Russia at Murmansk. And many American merchantmen went down in that sub-zero weather because the Germans were able to sink those ships. And it was a nip and tuck with us for 42 and the first part of 43. The British had a system where they required a pilot to fly 5 times on a mining mission, mining the sea lane between Sweden and Germany, where the Germans got all their steel, iron ore, before the pilot was allowed to bomb Germany. He had to go out at night and drop these mines. That was a make-you-learn part of their air training.
Remarkable. Okay, can I take you to just go forward a little bit now? When the war ended, you were in the Navy, obviously. What was your immediate job after World War II?
Well, after World War II, I had the most interesting assignment that I can remember. I was assigned as a member of the Strategic Bombing Survey, which originally had been organized to analyze the air war in Europe, but actually turned out to be much broader than that. And I was a member of the group that went to Japan. And I was there right after the nuclear weapons were exploded. I visited Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
What were your impressions at that point when you saw those places?
Well, of course, there were all kinds. We had scientists by the thousands that flooded into the place, and we had all kinds of speculation as to what it would do to the future. Now, I've been back since then, and you can't tell there's ever been an atomic bomb there. All the vegetables are growing, and all the grass is growing, and the flowers are blooming, and so on. So I didn't know what the hell they were talking about, but it was a tremendous amount of interest. But it was I had an opportunity to see the impact of an A-bomb on a steel mill, and I found out how the Japanese at that time operated their hospitals. I visited the hospital. They just had a great big hall, and the feeding of the patient was a duty of the family. And they would all light up these little plants, charcoal burners to cook food for them. It was a real mess, smoking all over the place. But one of the interesting things was that a friend of mine, we drove a Jeep down from Tokyo and we took a lot of candy and chewing gum, and we'd go into a little town, and they not a grown-up in sight, but the kids would start peeping around the corner, and pretty soon they'd come out, and we'd give them candy and so on, and before you know it, the parents would come out, and next thing you know, we were invited in their house for a cup of tea. And
so they were. Go ahead. They were relieved the war was over. Obviously.
Yeah,
I mean, they were ready to
the thought always occurred
lives.
to me that if the situation had been reversed, and the Japanese had been driving a Jeep through Tennessee, he'd wound up with a bullet off his head before he got 50 feet. And I was amazed that the Japanese parents took that attitude as we drove back and forth.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think the emperor had gotten on the radio, which is very rare for him, and said the war is over. So that's all they needed. The war is over. And so they were resigned to their fate, might say.
Now, in an interesting book recently, it's been shown that President Truman was prepared to drop a third bomb if the Japanese army and emperor and government hadn't agreed to come to surrender terms. Was there a kind of a sense of expectation after that second bomb, do you remember, in which people didn't know whether the Japanese would surrender or not? And was there a kind of what shall I say, a kind of a suspense as to what the United States might do?
Well, we were preparing an invasion, which had we executed would have been terrible. I think that the casualties on each side have been far greater than people anticipate, because I talked to the Japanese about that, and they, for instance, every airplane they had was going to be a kamikaze airplane. They had scuba divers by the hundreds that were going to swim out to the ships when they anchored with the troops aboard and affix charges to the sides of the ships. They had, I have pictures of one of the big carrier dry docks full of little two-man submarines. I think there are about 40 or 50 of these submarines in this dry dock. They were all going to go out and torpedo the ships when they came in. And they had set up, they had 6 full divisions, I think. And they had a big propaganda campaign. When I was commander of the 7th Fleet, I lived at Yokosuka in 1961-62, and we had a Japanese maid whose husband was a colonel in the Japanese army, but he'd been killed. And she told us that they were told that all the women are going to be raped and killed, and they did everything they could, the government did, to frighten the citizens. Mm-hmm. The point was also that it was the emperor that brought the war to a close. There was a war party, a war group headed by Tojo, the prime minister, who we later hung, so he didn't want to ever stop the war.
Right.
And I'm not sure that I support this war criminal execution that we did in Germany and to Japan, because you're never going to get the man in charge to agree to stop the war if he's going to get hung when you do it.
Right. My guest today is Admiral Thomas Moore, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Admiral, we're talking about the Second World War and Japanese attitudes about the war and about the war's conclusion, the position taken by the emperor and his prime minister, and you were saying that you'd been involved in the interviews of senior Japanese officials.
Yes, and I was struck by the fact that there was a significant difference between the attitude of the Army officers and the Navy officers. The naval officers were very cooperative. They were bringing their operation reports out and translating them. We'd get them translated and lay our battle alongside their battle and see what we thought happened and what they thought happened, and it was really fascinating. The Army, on the other hand, would only click their heels and give their name and serial number. And the reason for that was obvious. Only the Army was being tried for war crimes, and they thought that we were involved in gathering evidence for war crimes, which we weren't at all. But that's what they thought, so they weren't going to tell us anything. Mm-hmm. And so we learned a lot. I was in a little group since I was at Pearl Harbor that was tasked to find out why they attacked Pearl Harbor. And we even talked to all the way up to the top about this, and they said
Admiral Yamamoto.
Every one of them said no, he was dead.
Uh-huh.
Yamamoto, he was killed, down in he was killed down in Solomon Islands, Bougainville. Okay. But anyway, the Japanese, I think, were all said the same thing. They said, look, you only passed the draft by 1 vote, and the Congress refused to fortify a wake in Guam Island that we wanted to capture, and that the U.S. Army was training in Louisiana with wooden guns, and our perception of you, and that word is a very important word. Our perception of you was that you wouldn't fight, really, or couldn't fight. And so that's what deterrence is. When you get down to it, we talk about deterrence quite often, but deterrence is simply a state of mind created in the mind of the potential enemy that his perception is that he'll lose if he starts a war. If his perception is he's going to win, he's highly likely to start the war. It's that simple.
Admiral Moore, I want to thank you very much. We're delighted you could join us today.
You've been listening to a special interview with Admiral Thomas Moore. The proceeding has been brought to you by the World War II Veterans Committee, a project of the American Study Center. For more information on the World War II Veterans Committee, please call 202-408-0944 or write to World War II Veterans Committee, 1030 15th Street Northwest, Suite 700, Washington, D.C., 20005.